Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra,
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people.
associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked.
and sometimes what didn't,
You will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts.
And inspire you to do even greater things.
We have an exciting and unusual episode lined up for our listeners of the Software People Stories podcast. Our guest, Badri Narayanan, began his career as a software engineer and today is a mental conditioning coach, leadership coach, and organizational management coach. He's used various data models and data to keep himself and his coaches in sync throughout the process. He's worked with some top players in sport like cricket and tennis. Badri talks about his consulting experiences with leadership coaching and organizational change management in material management companies. This is an exciting conversation where we see a confluence of technology in sport. Badri and host Gayatri are talking about how it all started and what Badri does. Tune into this one, folks.
Welcome to the Software People Stories, Badri. Happy to have you here.
Absolutely, vice versa.
Thanks for taking such a late evening call from the Bay Area. Like all the podcast guests, I would like to hear yourself, an introduction to our listeners.
Absolutely. Firstly, Kathy, thank you for having me here. And it's been long coming, but I wanted to kind of share some of my insights on a little bit of myself, what I do. I am, I would say, a software guy turned sports psychologist, mental conditioning coach. And I've been in this field right now for close to, I would say, on both fields for close nearly 20 plus years now. The whole thing has been an alchemy from being a software person to a sports psychology person, and how software has been an integral part to help out on the psychology side of things. That's pretty much my stuff, and and then been working with a lot of cricketers, tennis players, and guys in table tennis. Pretty much name it on the sports side of things, and also on the industrial side of things. We've been working a lot closely with material management companies and helping them out on the leadership coaching side of things, and also in the organizational development, along with how with the HR side about how psychology actually helps, and again how software tools that we use help out in making changes and into development, and also on the we do a lot of data analysis and how data warehousing, we can call it, how that has been a significant part in athletes development. That's pretty much it. It's like a big enchilada, but so we'll try to break it down as much as possible.
I think, yeah, if I can safely say, you must be the first guest in our podcast who has such a varied experience across different industries. From being in software, I know you were a project manager in software. Can you share what led you into psychology?
I think psychology has been an integral part. Like, because I used to play a lot of tennis in college, and be it in my bachelor's and master's, but also, like as I grew up, and sport has been a very integral part of me. Obviously, when you lose, and especially when in sport, you lose a lot. So losing always has an impact on your psyche. So I was always intrigued by the psychology side of things. And my dad was a voracious book reader, so he would pass me a lot of books about what psychology is, and he would keep on, and I didn't believe it. I was thinking that it's my fate, and that's why I was losing. And then from there, that part was always there as in the back of my mind. But then obviously you go into engineering, and then you go into that aspect of life, and sport is also an integral part there. For me, that the psychology was always lingering behind in my mindset. And even in work, and I think when I was doing project management or quality assurance, it was always coming down a lot toward your soft skills, and you're obviously where you have to, because you're not just dealing with deliverables, but you're also dealing a lot with people, and how psychology plays such a big role there. I think that was, so it helped me immensely there. But at the same time, it was also a challenge to kind of like, because sport was always about performance, and you obviously, it was like what you give is what you get. Here it was more about learning to push the right kind of buttons, especially with people. It's about what buttons to push that's going to help them perform. That was a very unique challenge on the software side of things. In sport, it is comparatively a lot more easier because there's a lot of hardness to it. I think that made for me to pursue the shift from project management to this. It's still the same. The essence or the principles behind it are still the same, but I guess the obviously the methods and the processes behind are different. And I think that's where I was churning between the two, and and found a way. It's like it's hard to explain it. At some point you find a way to gel between, and I still do a lot of consulting work on that front, but I think it's now I see it as a tool. It's been a very fascinating, sometimes frustrating, but at the same time, a very evolving journey for me.
Let's talk about your more fascinating stories when you move to the psychology side, right? Because if you think about it, software is a team sport, and
Mhm.
particularly an outcome. It's not like a 6-4, 6-3 outcome like a tennis game, right?
Mhm.
It may have worked, and it's slightly more vague. You can only know based on the number of downloads or click to action or whatever that is outcome is. What has been those fascinating stories?
I mean, when you move to the psychology again, when players come to you, they obviously, like, be it in cricket or in tennis, they're looking for that edge. They want to kind of accomplish. Obviously, it's like a goal. It's like any project, right? Because this is what we want eventually. You have a statement of purpose. This is what you want to accomplish, and these are my challenges, and this is what I want to be. And so they make it pretty crystal clear about what they want. But everybody wants that end result. It all comes down to how they're going to embrace the work. And of course, psychology is like, because sometimes people think, oh, okay, there's the biggest taboo for players is to, like, there is sometimes a feeling like, okay, my personality is like this, or I have mental issues. To convince them that, okay, there's not a mental issue, it's like a mental muscle building. And that's the hardest part for a player to realize, that, okay, it is not like, okay, I'm born like this, so I can't change. Okay, I'm with a psychologist, so there's got to be something wrong with me. And those are the initial taboos that every player would have, like, okay, this is not right, or in different levels. Some guys are just fine. They'll be like, okay, they might have seen the Western world about how it operates, and then they just walk in straight through. Some, it was a challenge of, okay, this feels like I'm weak mentally, which is really not the case. And that's the biggest stigma in the society on mental health has been that, right? So I think that part was the first, like, I had to squash that out, so that they realize that, okay, and I just can't just squash it out by talking. So there is a lot of data that comes into it. So I think that's what I was mentioning earlier about. It's like, I would say, software data mining for sport is it's a completely it was something very new. But at the same time, if you look at it now in the bigger history of things, be it IBM Watson on how it's involved in sport, like especially in tennis, and then you also have Infosys kind of getting into the data side of things. We there are some of our players who we have a data analyst it's in house. The main reason why that has come into the picture is players like to see, okay, this player started here and he is here now. You made all these changes. How are they going? They like to see that number, even though psychology looks like, okay, it's a transition, and honestly, you cannot put, okay, A to B to C, but there is a path, there is a process, there is an, let's call it, and even if it's an upward spiral towards success, they see those, okay, this makes, okay, so he started here, then he made this change, then he went here. Outside it didn't look like he was growing, but he was building the muscle here, and then this happened. That's, it's like diet. When you start off on the diet, it's hard, it's very hard to do it. And so it looks like when you start off on any healthy diet, you see the first thing is a nosedive. It's almost like the universe is testing you. Are you up for it? And you got to keep saying yes, 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 I am, till you reach a point where you, okay, I'm growing now. And so it's, but players like to see that data, see which, I mean, they don't want to know about the other players because of various disclosure agreements involved. But they like to see, okay, this is the journey of this particular player. Okay, and that's the part where software gives the guy the assurance. It's more of like, like, okay, all will be like, all is well kind of mindset, but they want some data to prove that. And I think that's, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think that the data has been such an integral part in helping us out.
So you're saying from a psychology, while it looks like psychology, but you also use a data-driven model to say, okay,
Hmm.
what change did they do, and what was the intervention, and what is the consequence? So, or the
Exactly.
So kind of an action or outcome that comes in. It's not very different from organization change management that we do, Badri. We do all
Yeah.
this change management strategy. We call this as a big word, right? Strategy, but it's actually just this. You see how where the organization is or the team is and say what are the changes that you want to bring and then measure. I'm very intrigued that even the body composition, all of that is taken as a data by sports team. It's not very visible from outside, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. It's like, people from outside are like, when they always see it, okay, they look at the finished product, right? And the finished product means, okay, this guy's changed everything. But because that's the final output, and then they see the final result, and then they derive, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But once they actually get into the process behind it, it's very difficult. And that's why even for athletes, we, like you said, it's a very feedback driven model. So we have like, okay, in 3 months, this is what we're going to see. First month, this is going to be here. Second month, you're going to be here. Third month, you're going to be here. And they like to see that progress. Okay, if I make this progress here, obviously they like to see the intrinsic change that's happening in the athlete, and then how it translates externally. And so as long as that graph shows progress, then it's like, there's a lot of pie chart stuff involved. There's a lot of, and sometimes it can be very frustrating for them, because then they see, okay, I've been doing this for 6 months now, is what's happening, and I think the data really helps them to kind of say, okay, I mean, athletes are always are happy about the upward side, not about the downward side. So when they see enough ups, then they just continue. But if it's too low and if they're not motivated, I think I just sometimes, when we stop working with certain people, we just say that, okay, these are stuff that's been given, but you're not doing it. The motivation part is kind of lacking. And then, like, our belief is like, if it doesn't work in 8 months and if I don't see consistent, there's always that threshold point. Then okay, we decide that based on that. I mean, of course, we use a bridge model to help them out and all that. But at the same time, once so even insights, results are where, when we use a data-driven model, it makes decisions easier, positive or negative. And I think that's been a very fascinating part of this. Yeah.
So I like the way of you saying it's not just because of data that the things make or break. Sometimes most of it is also mind driven and probably innate capability also. Some
Yeah.
have that
Yeah.
innate capability, and are you able to harness that strength?
Yeah, and sometimes you've seen, like, okay, you stop working with some person for 8 months, and then there's a break, and then later suddenly, like you said, like suddenly the student's ready again, and this time he's really ready. So it's not like, okay, it's like, okay, oh, we couldn't choose you, your resume still remains in our database, right, kind of thing. So and then we pick it up again, and there have been cases like that too. Sometimes it's just that initially they come and then they get overwhelmed with what they have to do, and then they feel, oh, my pain is better than the suffering that I have to go through to get out of this. They head back in their shelter, and then they come back after 2 years or so, and then, okay, then I'm ready again. It all comes down to seeing some players, if they see them succeed on the outside, and they're like, this guy did it, he made it. So, and it's always driven by the competition side. But for me, it's vital that I have all the information from a data standpoint, and that really helps me in kind of making constructive decisions. Should I give this guy a chance back? Or we all have our own threshold parameters. Like, these are things that he's got to do. If this guy fails here, then I still have to take that hard decision. So it's kind of, it's tough, but at the same time, you got to stick with what works for you.
So when you talk about people and data-based approach, right? Do you have a set of people you limit your coaching to, or there is no such number? It depends on really the season and the need for it.
See, we work with teams, we work with individuals, we work with juniors, seniors. There's just that different cadre of people. So team games, it's a little bit more different. There, the data is more on based on team-based model. I mean, you still are working individually with them, but as such, how all that works cohesively in a team setup. Say, even with tennis players, there is a big team. It's just not the player alone. You got the skills coach, you got the fitness coach, you got the mental conditioning coach, you got like pretty much like 8 people. So it's not just a barometer just for the player, but also a barometer for all the people involved. So I think from at a time, obviously, when you're there, you limit yourself to more like a 1:4 ratio. because that's all the brain can handle, especially from a psychology standpoint, because then it becomes too conflicting. But then when you're in a team setup, you pretty much are going to allocate a solid 3-4 months, and you're just dedicated with the team. And in that time, when it's not like sport never ends, like cricket and tennis are how they operate is like, it's pretty much, if you combine the two, 52 weeks isn't enough. India plays a lot of cricket, and then you have tennis is like 35 to 40 weeks a year. So because it's the individual side of things on that, you're able to balance the time out, and also the time that you already have spent with the player. When they're relatively new, the amount of time you spend is more extensive. But once they are with you for a longer time, then you can pretty much structure your time accordingly. So I think it's a combination. It's like I've learned initially, it is like take everything and anything and everything. Later now, over the last 7-8 years, I think I wouldn't say I've mastered it, but I've found a way to kind of, now everything is remote. But back in the day, it was like, okay, how am I balancing travel to India? How am I balancing travel to Europe? And how I'm traveling within? And that travel is my individual challenge. But as far as the relationship is, like, sometimes it's one-on-one and sometimes it's one-to-many. And we are in a much better space now.
Very interesting. We have this maturity model, right, in software. We
Yes.
talk about as the product management matures, they do less of context switching and more prioritization. So when you were talking about teams and number of, yes, I was wondering, how do you do context switching? So much of context you have to switch between people, between leadership and tennis. I think I'm just fascinated as to how you would even remember all those incidents and kind of correlate it and bring it out. So do you prepare before every interaction, or I'm very fascinated to understand that.
Just like how you're conducting this interview. Exactly. And let's conduct how you're conducting this podcast. You know the subject, right? You read about the subject. You have to have some kind of love with the subject, right? And just kind of the background, and just kind of like digging deep. And I know you are a very curious person, so and that's kind of, I think that plays a big difference. Curiosity and obviously trying to stay as open as possible. Like, then you learn a lot. And then there is obviously at some point you need to learn to shut it off also. But initially for me, just to spend a lot of time understanding, and just have that childlike curiosity about it. And I think once you do that, then and sometimes you know enough to a point where you can almost kind of feel what the other person feeling and thinking and all that. And I think once that, and that's something that never goes. It's like a sometimes a dad-son relationship, sometimes a brother-to-brother relationship. So you know, and you can kind of start off where you left off. And I don't think I've tried hard on that. Like, obviously initially when the subject of psychology was harder than these things. These are like, okay, psychology, but I think the subject of psychology of actually understanding and translating that into how am I going to take a cell-like approach to it, and that was the hardest part. But then once the cells start performing in unison, then that part was easier. I think just the whole core understanding of the technicalities behind it. I think that was, once that became ingrained, and you become more trained in it. I think once that became easier for me, then after that, it's just like it's easier to switch. I mean, I can't explain it how, but it's so far I've at least managed to maintain that sanity without like talking, okay, what did you do last time? Sometimes and they, like sometimes your professors forget your name, like, what did he actually do, by the way? Were you really in my class? Things like that. Well, yeah, this is maybe you are really a forgetful student, or like a student that teachers want to forget. So, but I think it's just more, I think, curiosity, to be honest.
Nice. You're talking about curiosity and having the base framework, and say, how do you understand each person, each interaction, and put it in the memory, as well as your own personal database.
We have a data. Like, it's not like we just kind of talk. There's everything that is obviously we speak. It's recorded. It's all of them is, and then all the questions that we have with our players and everything are all, even if it is interactive, but each one has its own point structure. Okay, when a person I have a checklist that I go with the player, and then each player's checklist is a little bit different based on the assessments we do with them. And then even though if it is just an interaction, like how, say, you and I are having, it is also created in such a way that, like, sometimes players want to, like, they might want to answer a question. Okay, and if I talk about mental toughness, they want to answer, oh, I am good here, I'm good here. They don't want to give that away, right? So, but it's structured in such a way about we give situations. Okay, what do you do here? What do you do there? So when they answer those questions in that fashion, then it's they become more open about it. And but there is always that little bit of trivia behind, which obviously they don't know. Now I can say, but they don't know. So and then based on that we evaluate, and that's our data. That's pretty much becomes, and we have a huge database for that, and then from there we and that evolves, because that is it's variable for each and every player, and based on your sessions and interactions I can always pluck it from there. So it's always, I do have like in my when I'm interacting, I always go back to that, and so it's not like there is a repository for all that, and then sometimes some players are completely checked in and sometimes they're completely checked out. And if they say that, oh, it's like, oh, I did this yesterday, and then I see, okay, the last time this guy touched this file was like 3 months ago, or it's like, or they have like, oh, I better get it done. And so that's where our understanding of technology helps, because then, oh, I did it yesterday, I didn't submit it, all those things happen, the kind of stuff that we would have done in college and school. Yeah, so that part, it's the amount of I think the knowledge and that support about, even when I was building the system, we with a team that helped us do it, it was, I mean, that for them that was huge, because then, okay, this guy has some technical knowledge about this, and so you could say, these are my requirements, these are the top 10 things I want, and of course those guys, when they give you estimates and stuff, because the assumption is like, okay, this guy is in the psychology side of things, but then we also have some the software development experience and project management experience, right? So they have to give us some realistic timelines about when it's going to be done, and so they can, okay, this query is going to take me 2 weeks, so come on, man, you can get this done in a week. So they're that kind of, so in a way it is like good. But then that, I mean, to answer your question, that repository that we have, it's completely software driven. So, and yeah, and without it, I don't think I would just be like, okay, I have a name board, sit down, and then talk, write it down and everything. That used to be how psychology worked back in the day. But I think in the last 15, 20 years, it's evolved immensely.
Fantastic. Yeah. I'm enthralled, to be honest, to say how much of data-driven models are being used, not just from a tennis, how they play skills, hard skills perspective, but also the soft skills, the mindfulness, and the psychology part of it. I'm amazed. To switch gears, right? From a tennis, right? Can we move to leadership? I know you do a lot of leadership coaching, organizational change management, you mentioned. How is that in the material management world or in the software world? How do you do that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, I can share without naming companies, but it's one of those things where, especially in the material handling world, and even in the biggest challenge is translation across continents, right? So you have the Asian contingent, and then you have the American contingent, right? So where the software or the say if it's robotics, or say your all those devices, right? They are highly or even in the biomedical devices, you can take it. Highly exceptional quality, and they can, it pretty much talks about itself. You don't have to do anything extra about it. But what gets lost in translation is how it translates from continent to continent. In Asia, it's okay, we got to do this. If this is what you're going to get, it's pretty much laid out a linear model. While in the US and rest of, they could be like, they want more control over it. They want to be able to tweak it, to the needs. I mean, like any company would like to, but I think it's more extensive in the Western world. We'd like to have that kind of control. And I think when I was doing part of the leadership coaching was like, it's to, like you have two worlds and each one has its own thing. And it's great. It's like culturally, they're both different, but each one has their own strengths. But if you're trying to like merge, if you have two companies merging on that front, and it's vital for companies to be able to learn from each other, and then also kind of translate when they come to our part of the world. And I think the biggest challenge for me for companies was like, okay, these guys are great, but they're not good on the marketing side because they get lost in translation. And then there's the other groups like, okay, these guys are all marketing, but they don't know enough about the product. So there's that battle that you have. So one of the roles was obviously for me to kind of help out in bridging the gap like that, and how to maximize the strengths and then kind of hover over the weakness a little bit, and how we're going to like use that model of, okay, to transition from one to the other without losing your core, because obviously you want them to maintain what their strengths are. But for the Western audience, it's more about understanding the product, understanding the Asian audience, but how they go about things, and then be able to speak that language. And then once and convince them to put in that effort. And that's where my thing was coming about, how to convince them. Because sometimes, in part of the sales process, you end up saying something about your product, and which may or may not do, and then it's more about just getting lost in translation, right? So how can you avoid, because those can lead to legal kind of issues, right? So how can you use, how do you kind of make sure that you don't mess up on those things, even though it's these, we can call it as training issues. Our role was more to kind of be able to talk to a select group of people from both sides, and point out about what needs to be done, how we're going to go about it, and have some structure to it without losing that essence. And they would have a select group of people for us to work with. They are very key people who know their subject in and out, but they needed that training to make sure that firstly it's to mainly to address the bridge, to bridge the gap, but also to evolve, make that relationship of cohesive work environment thing that we want to work to push ourselves towards. And I think that's where the coaching comes into existence from my end, at least on the leadership side.
See, the earlier, I think when on-site travel was very new, the time there used to be this program called First Time On-Site Traveling Sensitivity Training. It was not sensitivity, some sort of a training program. I forgot the actual program name. When I went through, they said you should do this, you should not do this. This is when you say this is what it means and what not. So it sounds like that at a much higher scale of coaching people for a new language. You're almost translating one to the other, right?
Yeah, it's like you and of course with your Asian looks and an accent, it really helps. So there's that's one other thing that they elected. Okay, I can speak to this audience and that audience, and and that sometimes it's, what do you call it? It's like offshore project management, if you can look at it, right? That's what they do. Is just that, okay, I can speak to this group of people and I can speak to this group, so it's like it works. So I understand how, and sometimes you get caught in the middle, and so it's not much different from project management, to be honest, except here it is more that you are addressing it from a very from a key leadership level for each group. And I think that that has played it's a big role to do. But I think whatever you do on that it's a make or make factor for how the two companies that are working together as one company now are going to take it to the next level. I'm talking from a leadership and standpoint, and also from again profitability and and making and there's the competition in that world is high, so, and it's bidding wars and things like that, so, and you have to play that role to perfection. Anything that you do, if it screws up, then it's a problem too. So it's a double-edged sword, so
it is right, because at that level, every misstep would cost billions in either side, and the lawsuits, I can imagine how many lawsuits can come in.
Yeah, it's tough, but it's I mean, that's what you're there for. That's what your specialization is for, right? So
Yeah.
so you cannot screw up. So yeah.
Very nice. I have loved this conversation so far, Badri. I know I can think of multiple follow-up discussions just only on organization change management or only on training and coaching. But given the time, I want you to say if you have any key takeaways that you want to share with our listeners.
Oh yeah, I mean should be another podcast also on that. But I'm saying, I think firstly, I think fascinating questions. You seem very genuinely interested in understanding, and able to bring different elements, different kinds of people onto the program, and each one bringing their own insights. You're able to put it under one cloud. I think I think the takeaway is just that how deeply interested you are in the field and truly wanting to understand. I think that's probably my biggest takeaway, and it also puts me in to go with even more vigilant with my own clients. So I think you're doing a fascinating job, and also you probably should teach me more on flexibility in yoga later. that probably should be it's like a visual cast or something. But overall, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you, and I think we should do more.
Thank you so much, Badri. You're saying take things as you get and be curious all the time. That is really key for you.
Curious George. That's my son who sees that all the time. Curious George.
Thank you so much for your time, Badri. And
Okay.
I really appreciate you spending time with the Software People Stories.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Malavika for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.